with that, I'll introduce Mike House from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and then we're fortunate enough to have Deputy Chief Dave Lloyd here from University of Maryland PD, who'll give you a much better feel for how to understand and how we're trying to understand how these teams how we can maximize performance and utilize these teams in a good fashion. So, Mike.
Thanks, Don. So first of all, I want to echo some things that Cliff and others have said here. We couldn't do this without the law enforcement teams that we partner with. It's all about them. It's all about making their teams better, making them more efficient at the job they're so passionately interested in. And I'll convey the same message, and I think I can speak for Kevin and his team at Battelle. We collaborate with them a good bit. All the team members are passionate about this too. We really want to make this work and get information out and help you guys do a better job. It was interesting that Danny mentioned the Auburn dogs and the initial PSC. We were involved as part of that actually through Don's efforts, kind of springing those first 10 teams into the airport. So that was sort of my introduction into Person-Borne Canine. So what I have queued up here is just a couple movies to sort of ground us in what we're talking about here. So specifically, just so we're clear, it's detection of an explosive odor on a person, static or moving. Simple environments, complex environments. So what I want to do is just show a few video clips. These are University of Maryland teams in some different types of operational capacities that they worked in. University of Maryland, where they're trying to figure out where are they going to use these teams, right? Where do they get the most bang for the bucks in using the team? This is one application. Below you'll see a different application. This is actually inside of the basketball arena. When they open the doors, it's going to be very crowded. It's a mixing bowl of people, and we really threw them to the wolves in this in terms of a green agency, new handlers. Let's see what you can do in a really complex environment. They actually can do a very good job in that environment of recognizing odor in a very complex environment. There might be 100 people milling about there. You can see change of behavior often right away. Cliff was there doing some of these assessments. The challenge will be maybe in that environment, and Chief Lloyd can speak to this, how to resolve that to who the individual is, that might be carrying that odor. So as Don mentioned, it's identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the teams is what we were really after. But I think maybe along with that, that's very important, but we don't do this in a vacuum without considering the ConOps. So as we identify the strengths and the weaknesses, we're also informing the police departments, the security agencies, how best to deploy their dogs. Essentially what we're doing is saying you have a detection system. In this case, it's a living, breathing dog and a handler married to the leash with it. That's a detection system. What we're trying to do is assess how good that detection system is in an operational scenario. With that data, we can provide that to the agency, and then it's up to them to decide how to use that detection system in their ConOps. They're resource limited. They can't put a dog necessarily at every checkpoint. So this gives them some information on how they could use those dogs best. So just some key things on the approach. I'm going to move through this. Some of these items I'll talk about a little later. It's key to use proficient teams. By proficient, I mean, odor recognition tests like we talked about before. You need to recognize that they understand the odor and that they can operate in the simple person-borne type environments and be proficient before we introduce them to more challenging situations. We had to identify what were the key parameters we were interested in, and that's a team effort. That's an effort between S&T and ourselves and the agency. Right? What are your concerns? What are our concerns? So you have to identify what those parametric study parameters are that you want. Number of data points. This is a really big deal. Don mentioned it. Statistical relevance. You can only, many handlers in the room, many trainers in the room, so you're aware that you can only run the dog for a certain amount of time. You can only have a certain reward frequency until you start to impose a negative effect on the canine and the handler. So this really stretches out the calendar length of time needed to do this. And it's really important to kind of decide on that up front. We execute single blind between the canine handler and the assessment team, so there may be 3 or 4 of us there. There's only one person knows the decoy. The handler does not know the decoy, so they're operating in the blind. The canine SME, Cliff or somebody like that would be there as well. They don't know the decoy either, so we keep this as honest as possible and move forward with that. Unknown decoys, very, very big deal here, both hot and cold. When I mean cold, I'm talking about control. The control being not the explosive odor, but it includes the packaging material that we have. So you can dissociate those two. Are they hitting on the explosive odor that you're interested in or the packaging material? It's very important to have unknown decoys. We've seen issues before where canine teams get a little lackadaisical. They just, they're in their routine and they're training on the same set of decoys too frequently, and maybe the dog or handler is making an association to that. Important to incorporate blank runs into it. We don't want the canine handler to expect to see one every time. He may see 2 in one run, right? 2 hot decoys in one run, he may see none. None is much more typical of what they're going to see in an operational environment. Again, we don't want to induce any false positives or bad behavior characteristics on the dog. We gather video documentation of all our assessments. That's very beneficial for us as adjudication of the scoring after the fact. So we'll have multiple scorers on this. We'll have a canine SME scoring, a member of the assessment team scoring. We compare those results at the end, much like Kevin and his team does with Patel. We also have video documentation, so if there's an issue with the score, we can go back and adjudicate that. But the video documentation is also important as an asset to the agency and to the trainer. So they can see, hey, here's the performance. Let me take a look at those teams because they can't always be present when we're doing the assessment. So it's a tool that we give back to the agency for them to improve their capability. We have to consider environmental conditions. There are things we can control, there are things we can't control. We can't control the crowd movement, we can't control weather extremes and so forth. So we have to measure those so we can take those into consideration when we're looking at the results. And then we also, it's important to vary the set times and the order for the participating teams. As you'll see in some of the venues we've worked on, we have, it's in a mass transit venue, so we can't control the crowd flow, it ebbs and flows, so we have to reorder the teams and the set times to keep everybody honest. So I talked about team proficiency. The key parameters that we agreed on for this assessment was the explosive odor, the mass of the odor, the location, placement on the body, if you will, or in something they carry with them, and a work zone length. The work zone length, I can't spend a lot of time here, but you only have so much time as an operator to resolve the canine once you find it. And that's going to really vary depending on your fixed asset that you've been handed as a handler, right, to protect. You can't design your facility for this. So we did some testing on work zone length and how long does it take you to resolve. Big takeaway points here. To get the sufficient data points, a lot of calendar time. We need a typical run time is 15 to 30 minutes. We can only do 1 assessment per team per day. So a 2-hour window, we can get 4 teams in, we're done for the day. So you get that few data points, right? So it's hard to get enough data points you want. Very important to coordinate with the operational venue, right? You have to execute during the times of the crowd flow that you're interested in, that you desire to protect. Got to deal with public perception. There will be people that will complain about the dogs in the venue. There will be people doing more than complaining, and they require law enforcement interdiction to take care of that. So you have to work with the authorities at hand to make sure they can handle that. And then what if you have a hit on a traveling public, not one of our decoys? Again, that has to be resolved. That's out of S&T's hands or the performer's hands. We hand that over to the law enforcement authorities to resolve that as they see fit. I talked about the decoy resourcing. One of the things we kind of lean on is that we don't use a known decoy or a decoy within 60 days from the last time the handler has seen it. And that's not just for the dog, but the handlers are they're trained to be observational, they're trained to be astute. So it's to keep both of those partners honest. So the venue we chose had predictable crowd volumes, this close proximity to the canine team, so we didn't pull them too far away from their operational venues if they had to respond to something. It was under roof, but open ground level entrances to a mass transit environment. Took about 31 calendar months to do this, 84 individual assessment events, 4 to 6 teams on a bi-weekly basis type thing. There's some environmental conditions, I won't get into those. Patron flow, you see there as well. I think the takeaway I want there is, 700 data points, 700 hot data points, 25 or so patrons per event, screened about 200,000 patrons total as part of this whole effort. So the results, again, sensitive, if you want to talk about those, you should contact S&T on that. So what are some of the things we can do to improve the assessments? Decoys are the big thing, right? They cost a lot of money if you go outside the agency, but beware of familiarity if you go inside to save money. So we're looking for inexpensive training aids, disposable, contamination-free, precise odor replicates, right? It decreases the operational burden to access the bunker for conventional training aids, which takes time out of the day. Decreases the operational burden associated with getting decoys. We're looking to be able to leverage the traveling public in this case, if possible. And then maybe even cost effectively produced by the agency themselves. So it saves transportation, storage, and some of those other cost factors that enter into this. So I'm just going to go ahead and click the movie if you would. So this is the actual venue where we did the assessments. It's a Greenbelt metro station outside of DC. And we'll only run this for a few seconds here. I'll have it on loop outside if you want to look at it. But this is, probably just happens to be during one of the light crowd flows. We tried to hit it around the morning rush hour. So you get waves of people in and out. But we varied the handlers throughout it so they get varying volumes of people. But in the essence of time, I can turn it over to Deputy Chief Lloyd, who's been a very valuable partner in all this. So.
Again, my name is Dave Lloyd, and I've been with the University of Maryland Police Department for about 4.5 years, and I retired from Prince George's County Police Department, a very large department. So when I came to University of Maryland, I already had this canine unit up and running, and I was immediately impressed. And what I want to talk about is the why, the partnership, the value. Clearly, I'm not a scientist. You'll realize that as I continue to talk. Cliff talked about police officers. We understand certain things. We don't understand others. So partner with JHUAPL, S&T is huge to help us. What's the difference in an officer walking around with a dog on a leash and then a trained team? You don't know what you got. So what we get through APL and S&T is the verification, the value, that the time, effort, and energy that we're putting into this is usable for what we're doing. Our department is very short on staffing. Right now we're about 70-some officers. We should be about 100 officers. So we have 5 officers assigned specifically to our canine unit. That's a lot. That's a lot of time, effort, energy, money, resources that we put in. There's a lot of time required working with S&T and the scientific testing that it's a leap of faith. It really is. And, it goes back to 2012. My chief, Dave Mitchell, and his chief of staff, Spud Blake, got this up and running, developed a partnership, and it's worked well. Our facilities are older facilities. Maryland Stadium, it was built back in the 50s. It's difficult to defend, and the normal criminal activity, we handle that fine, as any police department does. But with post 9/11, things changed. The advent of vehicle threats and person-borne threats, and we had gaps. We still have gaps, and so what this team does for us is help close those gaps to the greatest extent possible. it had to be sold. Every time we do a parent orientation or a student orientation with incoming students for our 40,000 plus students, we talk about canine. We're talking about not only that we have these dogs. A lot of people ask, why would a university have canines? And part of it is simply just selling the safety. They're cute, and so we shamelessly throw that out on Instagram, and we kind of get that out there. So why it works for us? Why not use it? But it helps to explain to academics, to our higher ups, because it comes back to funding. And if you don't have the funding, you're not going anywhere. And so we work through that pretty well. But the presentations are taken very well. We go into some detail, just kind of talking about what's what. A lot of times people think that our dogs are drug dogs. Well, my chief says we wouldn't do that to a dog on a college campus. You don't need a drug dog on a college campus. Just walk around and start knocking on doors. Everybody's got weed. I mean, it's all right. Not so much explosives. So what we do is it's a sales job. When parents drop their children off to us, they're entrusting us. And this great partnership has worked out very well for us. We chose labs. We're working in groups. Here you have a police officer, uniformed police officer with a dog. And if you got a German Shepherd, that scares people a little bit, especially working inside, as the videos were shown, our basketball arena, football stadium. It scares people. The problem we have is trying to keep people off the dogs, and we got signs, nobody listens, and every once in a while we should sell, you get $5 for a pet or something like that. That would work out pretty well. That's another funding opportunity we'll discuss later. So, proficiency. How do we keep these teams proficient? Well, first thing we did, we've chosen to have our teams be full-time teams. Now, they will help out with patrol because we get short on occasion, so they'll help out here and there, but they're fully dedicated. Sergeant Matt Southern, who's in attendance here, is the leader of the team, and they train often, sometimes 3 times a week. Depends on circumstances, sometimes a little less. But the goal is to keep them as proficient as possible. S&T has been huge. JHU's been huge with keeping us at the forefront. I believe that we're at the forefront. How do I know that? Because a lot bigger departments reach out to us. It's interesting when my home department, Prince George's County, reaches out and said, "Hey, we need a little help at FedEx Field. Can you hook us up?" And we did. Dalai Lama has been on campus. President Obama used to come to campus on a regular basis when he was in office. So in our proximity to Washington, D.C. means that there's a lot of interesting things going on. Are we a target? Sure. What isn't a target nowadays? You got 40,000. We're a very soft target. We don't have high walls around the place, and it's just working with what you got. So the regular training helps us keep on point. Again, smaller agency. It's difficult. It's very difficult to keep this up, and it's got to be dedicated. The resources and time effort has to be dedicated. We started with 4 dogs. We had green handlers. They never operated dogs. Cliff knows that. And you're trying to work from nothing. Well, we're 7 years in. Unfortunately, early this week, we lost one of our dogs, and we're wearing warning bands for Canine Chief. That's how important we've incorporated this into what we do. That it's a huge loss, and and it wouldn't be like that if it was just a side piece. So it works well for what we do. The value in verification. The value in verification, as I said earlier, anybody can walk around with a dog. I got a lab at home. It looks like I'm searching. I'm not searching anything. I'm taking them out to use the bathroom. The way we use our dogs and the contact teams, when you do, or whether it's training or you're running across people, our canine handlers can't be involved necessarily when you're dealing with somebody that may be a target or presenting a threat. So we have people come in, again, more resources, more time, more training. If it was easy, everybody would have a team like this. It's not. Again, it's difficult. We are constantly trying to improve how we protect our campus. Again, I said earlier that, it's an open campus. It's a state land. Anybody can come on, which means unknown threats constantly. We've got a lot of secret agencies nearby. We've got a lot of military on campus that are learning, getting advanced degrees, and working on a lot of different things. So we are just prime for the pickings. And so what this does is help us. The value, I can't state enough, because if it wasn't for APL, if it wasn't for S&T, we wouldn't have this. We simply wouldn't. We just don't have the ability to pull it all together with limited resources. The state of Maryland, nobody goes to the state of Maryland because they want to get rich. For the University of Maryland in particular, on a university, the staff side is less funded than the academic side. So working through funding partnerships and the verification, you can show through scientific data that what you're doing is useful. And as a police commander, you just feel that you're closing the gaps, and it works very well for us. So, we're going to stick around. Major 2, who's in charge of our Patrol Services Division, is here. Again, Matt Southard. If you have any questions for myself or us, feel free to reach out. But I can't express enough how important this is to what we do every single day. So thank you.